discussion as incidents of mass shootings and general gun violence become rampant in South Africa. Let's bring in Adele Kirsten. She's a founding member of Gun Free South Africa. Adele, thanks very much indeed for your time this afternoon. I think it's fair to say that in the last few years, in particular areas in our country, there's been a marked increase in mass shootings like the one that happened in Lusikisiki over the weekend.
Good afternoon, Michelle. You're absolutely right. It's really since 2021 where we first saw mass shootings happening mainly in taverns. What this has meant also is that increasingly women are being killed traditionally, or the stats show that women are most vulnerable in their homes to being shot and killed. But this is changing that pattern. And of course, many more people are being killed, but we're also seeing that people are sustaining multiple gunshot wounds. It's not just single gunshot wounds. That's the evidence that's coming through from our mortuaries, but also from health data as well as from SAPS data.
I mean, the statistics, the numbers are incredibly shocking. Your research tells us that 34 people are shot dead in South Africa, not just murdered, but specifically shot dead in South Africa every day. What does it tell us about the gun reforms that are needed in our country?
Well, what it tells us is that guns are easily available, and that includes ammunition. I think we mustn't forget that aspect. And it means that there's not sufficient control over weapons. And that's a policy decision that needs to go upstream. But what we've seen is over the last couple of months an increase in SAPS recovering weapons. Now, that's critical. Getting weapons out of circulation interrupts the movement of weapons in the criminal market. But that's what's known as a secondary intervention. It's recovering the gun after the fact, after it's moved in criminal hands and a crime has been committed with it. So it's important, but it's not enough. What we know is you have to go what's called upstream, or you have to develop a primary intervention, which is you have to stop the supply of guns.
Easier said than done, I imagine, Adele. How do we go about doing that?
No, I mean, it requires resources and it requires political will and it requires bringing an amendment to the gun law to Parliament. That's work. But the evidence has proven both in South Africa and elsewhere in the world that you have to stop your supply. And we know the guns that are being recovered, you'll see journalists are reporting that the serial number's been removed. We automatically know that that means it was once legal. The guns that are being lost from SAPS, those are once legal guns. So the evidence is that you have to stop the supply of the legal market. You have to reduce the number of guns entering into the legal market. One of the best ways to do that is to strengthen gun law. And in this country, we also need to sort out our central firearms registry, because right now, our state does not know how many guns are out there in legal or illegal hands.
So just to hone in on what you're saying about reducing the number of legal guns that we have, are you alluding to the issue of, how prevalent it is during break-ins and the like, where guns are stolen and they then make it onto the street and into, for example, gangs?
That's part of the story. So what you have to look at is the number of guns that are being lost and stolen every single day is on average 24.
Sure.
And we've seen over the last couple of days reports of police losing guns. And that's consistent with what we've seen over the last 10 years. On average, 2 to 3 guns are lost or stolen from SAPS or from other state departments. But so the majority are coming from civilian loss and theft, and that includes your private security industry. So what's strengthening your national gun law means is that you apply the principle, which is that you limit or you restrict who can own a gun, the kind of weapon that you can own, and the purpose for which that weapon is, whether it's hunting or sports shooting or self-defense. Now, we have an amendment that was brought to the public in 2021, where there was significant strengthening of our existing gun law. And that's been it hasn't been withdrawn. It's just been sitting on the minister's desk since 2022. That gun law needs to come to Parliament. It will need to be revised again, because I think we're seeing different patterns of gun violence emerging over the last number of years. But this is a piece of legislation that in the past has proven to reduce our gun deaths when it's well enforced. But right now it's not being properly enforced, and it needs to be strengthened. There are significant loopholes which are facilitating and enabling the movement of weapons into the illegal market, but also loss and theft is the major contributor to weapons moving into criminal hands.
Yeah, absolutely. 24 guns lost or stolen every single day in South Africa. That's a shocking number that I've never heard before. My next question to you, Adele, would have been, do we have the political will right now? Are we taking the issue of mass shootings and gun control seriously? But perhaps you've already answered that in part. If this legislation is sitting on the minister's desk, gun reform legislation, since 2022.
So I think we have a new administration, and we have to acknowledge that. And I think we're seeing over the last number of months this increase in illegal gun recovery. Those are positive signs. Gun Free South Africa, together with some of our partners, are trying to engage the minister on this matter to put very clear solutions on the table, one of which is to sort out the Central Firearms Registry. Record keeping is seen as a cornerstone of good gun laws. And this is sort of global good practice. And right now we have a central record keeping system that is a mess, to put it mildly. I think there is political will. I think it's about prioritizing gun crime and gun violence and putting in place things like dedicated specialist firearms units, but also looking at the amendment and reviewing it and bringing it to Parliament. That will be, I think, a critical sort of indicator about whether the new administration is serious about prioritizing gun-related crime and violence.
Yeah, absolutely. It's very interesting, isn't it, Adele, how from country to country the issues around gun control differ. I'm just thinking of in the US, where the issues around gun control and reform are so incredibly different to South Africa. It's relatively easy, some might say, to get your hands on a gun in the US, and we see the results of that with the sheer number of mass shootings that takes place in various states there. Here in South Africa, the problem is a little more complicated.
Michelle, you're raising an important point of looking at other countries. Your local context and the kind of political and socioeconomic conditions are absolutely key to helping you understand the nature of gun violence, but also what the solutions are. So, for example, the single biggest contributor to gun deaths in the US is actually suicide. But the mass shootings get our attention. In South Africa, handguns remain the leading cause of murder in this country. And this is common in many developing countries like Brazil, Jamaica, El Salvador. The problem in countries like South Africa is homicide. Although we have significant suicide numbers in this country, and it makes us look slightly different to some other countries that are similar to us. So it's about working out the interventions that are appropriate and relevant for the context, bearing in mind that this is a complex phenomenon and the factors that drive gun violence are really varied, and you need to unpack that in detail. That's one of the conversations we are wanting to have with the Minister of Police, is to really sketch out, this is what gun violence looks like in this country. These are the interventions that work. And the single most important intervention is what we call going upstream, is you have to stop the supply, you have to strengthen your gun law, you have to improve your record keeping, and then you have to have really dedicated intelligence-driven operations that mop up the supply. It's really on one hand quite simple, but you need to bear in mind the kind of complex factors that drive gun violence. But you remove the weapon from the equation. You take that out of the equation, and it fundamentally alters any kind of argument, any family feud, any crime.
Domestic dispute.
It alters the outcome. And we reduced our gun deaths by 50% over a 10-year period, from 2000 to 2010. And that was because of a really kind of comprehensive, concerted effort of putting in place a range of operations to reduce access to guns, but also to remove guns from circulation. We can do this again. We have the resources, we have the capacity, we have the intelligence within SAPS. It's a case of just, it's prioritizing it, and that means putting in place budget and resources to it. But it can be done. It needs to be done. This is not a nice to have. This is an absolute, I mean, we're at epidemic levels, particularly in provinces like the Western Cape, KZN, Eastern Cape.
Yeah, absolutely. It is such a complex phenomenon, as you say, and so it is essential that we get the absolute basics right. Adele, let me thank you for your time this afternoon. Adele Kirsten is a founding member of Gun Free South Africa.